So the first slide is, it's up here so it's in my focal length. The first slide's a twin card, that's it. And this is a set of cards for country towns all across Australia, and this is the Gawler version. And all of the cards are split into two views like this, and these would have been photographs sent to Germany of all places, because that's where these cards were done. And
thanks, Dan.
And so with a lot of postcards that are based on real photos, you don't really know, I'm trying not to block their view, you don't really know when the original photograph was taken in comparison to when the card was issued. Now, this card started to appear about 1908, however the views probably a little bit earlier, about 1906. The next slide there is a blow-up of the lower portion there, the Gawler Showgrounds, and I think that's about 1906. I can't be sure, but looking at the dress, the scenery, what's going on, and another view, which is the next view along here, is a card from one of the Gawler Bunyip series showing a very comparable scene to the earlier one that's in colour, and this one dates to 1906. Tonight's talk is actually going to be on events in Gawler, and I've supplemented that with a few sporting views as well, because that was one of the original requests from a couple of years ago. So the next slide's another view of the Gawler show, also around 1906. And the Gawler show was sort of about the same time as it is now, August, sometimes, well, probably more frequently in September, and still just prior to the Adelaide Spring Show, because back in those days there used to be two Adelaide shows, one in autumn, one in spring. And if you look closely there, you can see the exhibits of farm machinery that were probably up for sale. The two big poles on the oval, I think, is for the sheaf tossing. They're not goalposts, I think it's for sheaf tossing. So, I've watched those guys Gawler show in recent times, and they do a good job even nowadays when it's a craft which is not all that in vogue. I've supplemented tonight's showing with a few real photographs rather than picture postcards, and the earliest, or second earliest event that I've got a photograph of in my collection is the next slide, and that's one of the ceremonial arches for a vice-regal visit. Now, what I've been trying to do is look closely at the descriptions of all the vice-regal visits to Gawler and get descriptions of the banners, the arches, the flags that were strung across the street to try and date them. And this one, I can positively tell you that this is a visit for the Governor in celebration of Queen Victoria's Diamond Jubilee in June 1897. The banner in the foreground there with the Advance Australia was actually erected by James Martins in front of their offices just south of Carlton Road corner. And you can see the tram there, also in the near foreground there, without its canvas canopy across the top, which is sort of a fairly rare view of the tram without the canvas on top. And further in the background there, the other arch with Welcome to Gawler on was put up by the Gawler Town Corporation on the day. So that's June 1897, quite an early photograph of an event in Gawler. The next slide's another vice-regal visit, which is a blow-up of one of those two views that we saw in the first card. And this, I believe, is a visit to Gawler by the Governor on the 1st of November 1906, when he came to Gawler to inspect the works going on in the factories of James Martins and May Brothers. And he came up just for a day trip and went away again. He particularly came to look at some refrigeration units that were being built by Martins to be sent down to a factory in Mount Gambier. Couldn't really get much more detail about what that was all for, but that's why he was here. The next slide is another vice-regal visit, and this is a fairly common picture postcard view. It's done by about 3 different publishers in black and white, photographic and coloured. So I picked a coloured one for you here, but who knows whether that's colours are realistic. And this one, I believe, is a regal visit in June 1904, when once again it was a day trip up here to do an inspection of the works that were going on in the town. the day. The next slide is a Marchant's view. Marchant's was probably the press photographer of the day. This is before photographs were being printed in the Bunyip. Even then, photographs were probably just starting to appear in the Chronicle newspaper in Adelaide, and most pictorial things can be actually confirmed by looking at the Chronicle newspaper photographs that are there. Now, this is the ceremony for the opening of the new tram bridge, which is the one that's still there. It's the Adelaide Road Bridge. And that bridge was actually built over the top of the previous bridge and raised quite a few feet to accommodate the tram. And this was done on the 22nd January 1908 by Sir George LeHunt, the Governor of the day. There's a fair crowd there. And that is a view which is, I won't say it's a common picture postcard view, but there are quite a lot of them, because it seems that when Marchants did make photographic postcards, he did make good quantities of them. Quite a few have survived. The next view is another vice-regal visit. This is Sir Day Bosanquet laying the foundation stone for the Hutchinson Hospital, and that was in December 1912. That is almost an identical photograph of that appears in the Chronicle soon after that, so that's positively identified. Of course, one of the challenges with picture postcards is identifying some of these pictures, and one of those challenges is represented in the next slide, which I've probably owned that card for about 20 years, and it's written on the back of it, laying with the foundation stone of the Hutchinson Hospital at Williston, so they're a little bit out there. But when you compare that with the previous picture, you'll notice that the people involved are entirely different, and the buildings show somewhat differently. And I've spent a few hours doing some research on that photograph, and what I now believe it is a 1926 view of the foundation stone of the maternity block at Hutchinson Hospital, which was laid by a Lady Bridges. And to complicate things even further, you think, well, who was Lady Bridges? So I do a search on the Australian Dictionary biography, and in the mid-1920s there's two Lady Bridges in Australia. There's one in Melbourne, who was the patron of hospitals in Victoria in the state. She was the wife of Sir William Bridges, who was the founder of Untitled Military School. And you'd think, oh, a lady who was a patron of hospital to be the right person to come along and lay the foundation stone for a maternity block. But no, it was the other Lady Bridges, who was the wife of the then Governor of South Australia, Tom Bridges. And she was also the Chief Commissioner of Girl Guides at the time. So I think that's a mystery of about 20 years solved, because Brian's forced me to do this talk tonight. The next slide is a repeat. There's not too many repeats in my talks, but this is one of them. It's actually the first royal visit, the second royal visit to Gawler. And that was by the Prince of Wales in 1920, when he was touring the Commonwealth, thanking the nations for their contributions to the war effort. And a part of the crowd of 5,000 people who turned up at the Gawler railway station, and he never got off the platform at Gawler railway station on his visit, and they all came to greet the Prince. The next slide is another view of the Prince on the platform at the railway station, and this is also a repeat from last year. And the two medallions, some people may have those. They come in three versions: a bronze, a gilded one, and apparently a silver one, which I've never seen, but I have seen a gilded one. They were given to all the school children in the Gawler district that were attending school on the day, and the gilded ones were actually sold at a premium at 5 shillings each to help pay for all the ones they gave away. Nice thing. Now, I'm going to ask for some help with the next slide. These ladies, I've had a good close look at the buckles on their belts, and I'm pretty sure they're Girl Guides. There's a message on the back that says this is dated 1915, and it says that these two ladies are Sister Annie and Candidate Ruth. And I'm trying to think what organisations call their members candidates. So I'm really not sure on that, but the card's dated 1915. Some research reveals that there was an attempt to set up the Guild Guides in Gawler in 1914, but that didn't happen. I've then found a reference to say that the first Gawler troop of Guild Guides was formed in 1925. However, in 1917 there's a reference in the council minutes for the Gawler and Bunyip, which was for saying that they were going to thank the Guild Guides for collecting all the paper for the war effort, and that was in 1917. So this is a mystery. So whose sister Annie and Canada Ruth are, I don't know, but this card came with the next card, and written on the back of this, it tells us that this lady is Dot Thompson, who may be a member of the Thompson family associated with the foundry. So if anybody recognises those people, I'll be keen to know who they are, what sort of uniform they're actually wearing, and what organisations have sisters and candidates. The next slide shows a drum and fife band practising, and I think that's just down the road, down these row of houses, I think it's Cameron Street, and you can sort of see up the hill there, so that's probably down about sort of Todd Street where the CWA is now. There's people here are practising for a concert or a parade through the main street. Another event which is commemorated fairly well in the picture postcard is the next one, and that's the opening of the Gawler branch at the Savings Bank. It was on a Saturday, on the 2nd of September 1911. So there's a good crowd there, and you can see that that building really hasn't changed too much. Only 100 years.
It's better now. It's better now.
Now, last year I showed a lot of military views, and earlier this year I got a phone call from one of the antique dealers that I spent too much money with, who then told me, I'm handling the collection of one of the state's biggest militaria collections, and your name's on his list of people to offer things to first because he knows that these people will look after the things in his collection. So I was somewhat honoured to be on that list, but it was an expensive trip. I did add a lot of new photographs of Gawler's military history to my collection as a result of that. And so what you're seeing tonight are things which I have added to my collection since last year. And the first of these is quite early, 1908, and this is a cadet camp in Gawler, and it's written on the back there that these camps used to go for about 4 days over Easter, and Sunday was a visitors' day, and so the cadets' mothers, wives if they were married, sisters and them, could all come to visit the camp and see what sorts of things they were doing, and obviously here we had one of the lady relatives of one of those gentlemen visiting on the Sunday visiting day in 1908, and pre-World War I views of camps are quite tough to find, so I was very pleased to have that one turn up. The next view is the 1913, the first of the Easter camps really held in Gawler of any great size. So this is the Army Medical Corps group of tents, and that was at the northern end of the Gawler Racecourse Oval. The next view is actually a photograph, which is, as I said, I've called it a CMF camp, which is the Citizens Military Forces of the day. There were no official defence forces at the time, they were all volunteers. And it's just a general view of people at wash-up time, I think. The next view are the officers of the 79th Infantry. And this is quite nice because on the back of that I've got them, all those people are named, so I can tell who they all are. Oh, wow. Yes. Which is good. Very useful when you should always write on the back of your photographs to say what they are. Yeah. It saves a lot of use. Right, now the next one I actually did show last year, and I'll be big enough to admit I made a mistake, and last year I identified this as the Light Horse Camp at the Gawler Oval in 1915. However, I've now found that exact same photograph in the Chronicle, and this is now 1913, in September 1913, and it was a camp that lasted for 4 days, and opposite the rifle range at Gawler South. So all the tents were set up in the paddock across the road, and they went and did their training on the rifle range there. and that was back in September.
The rifle range at Lifestyle Village, where Lifestyle Village currently is, was the rifle range that was in operation in 1955. Same place, do you think?
Where's the Lifestyle Village?
Up behind
Potts Road.
Yes.
Off Potts Road.
Yes, Potts Road.
Up behind the dunes.
Yes, that's right.
Because that was still operational when I was about 13
Yes,
as a rifle range, because Air Force cadets were using it.
that's right. So we always learn, never stop learning.
Oops.
The gentleman in the next slide, very prim and proper. This is the commanding officer of the 22nd Light Horse at the Gawler Oval Camp in April 1915. This gentleman's name is R.R. Baldwin. And have a good look at him, because you'll see him in some other views later as well. But, very smart, as you would expect a commanding officer to be. By contrast, the next slide shows just light horsemen, also for the 22nd, at the same camp. In April 1915 there was 3 camps of light horsemen, the 22nd, 3rd and 4th, and they were there for 2 weeks each. And something that's not always accurate is that people think that any picture of horsemen in Gawler are the light horsemen. In World War I they rarely brought their horses to town. All the camps of the light horsemen in World War I were for training in small arms and musketry. And it was very seldom that they had horses here. Most of the views of the horsemen are from the 1920s camps. See. Right. The next view is another new addition, and that's the band of the 24th Light Horse, also here in April. The Gawler Bunyip gives lots of reports of the interaction between the light horsemen and the citizens of Gawler, and the band featured quite prominently at fundraising events, and they were very popular by all accounts. And just to make a liar of me, the next slide shows light horsemen on horses. The Gawler Bunyip reported that when they left the town at the end of April, they did do a march through Bury Street, so I'm imagining that this is the assembly for that march when they left the town. Now, I like this next view, the kitchen staff, also at the Gawler Showgrounds. Tidy and clean is their motto, and this is a troop of the 22nd Light Horse. And so that's obviously a mound with all those things picked out in stones to spell out the wording. Lovely picture of the day. Next slide's sort of the same group of people again, a bit wider shot, there are a few more different people in there. And the next one we move to, we go back to the Evanston Racecourse for one of the Citizens Military Forces camps. Now I've been trying to distinguish the Citizens Military Forces and their place in the World War I training camps, and I sort of learned that you know there was a big conscription debate in World War I and that failed, and it appears that a lot of people joined the Citizens Military Forces because if they were a member of that they couldn't get recruited and conscripted and sent overseas. So these lots of people joined up for that, whereas if they volunteered for one of the proper army things, they probably ended up in Egypt or Gallipoli or France. The 1916 one at the racecourse was particularly memorable because this is the one where they had a big rainstorm and got flooded out, and they all ended up sleeping in the grandstand rather than in the tents. So there's a little view of them there. The previous one shows them there in front of the grandstand at the racecourse. Back to the Gawler Showgrounds again. This is the 1918 camp, and this is the 23rd Light Horse, 23rd Battalion of the 8th Light Horse, was its correct term by then. Now the next slide is the last of the new ones that I acquired at the beginning of the year, another Citizens Military Forces camp, and this is the 79th Infantry again. We tended to find that the 74th, 6th, 7th, 8th and 9th, 80th, 81st, 82nd Infantries all came to Gawler each Easter to do their training. They covered large parts of the state as the drawing areas from those, and also from Broken Hill. Now, some of the post-war camps, we'll come to the next few slides. This is 1925, according to what's written on the back, and the back does give me a few names of these gentlemen. I think I cropped them out there, but some of those, they had arrows pointing to various people, but I cropped them out with the picture. And, as I say, completely different tent styles, all set up on the racecourse of the day. The next slide is from the same group of cards. I have no idea what that machine is. Anyone recognise what it might be? Yes.
Not portable ovens, are they?
Sometimes just,
Portable ovens?
Well, they could be portable ovens, yes.
sometimes just to keep them hot rather than ovens.
It would certainly be into catering in a big way. Some of these things had, 1,200 to 1,500 people on the racecourse through the Easter camps. The next slide is a 1927 view, all neat and proper again. And the next one is also from the same series, also 1927 is the date that's written on the back. And you may well be right about them being mobile ovens with the bloke with the lady there, some couple of ones, so you may well be that's what they are. Yes. The following year, 1928, this is the 27th Battalion's band. I know there's a brass band still quite popular with people in Gawler and the Procession, and certainly those who remember Doug Petty at the when he was at the Bunyip always come to me for new photos, and if ever I had a band photo he was fascinated by it because he was a fireman and was in a fire brigade band. Another one from 1928, and here we see a good group of horses and wagons, and this was for the march past the governor who visited the camp in that particular year. We move on to 1929, and this is the machine gunners from the 3rd Light Horse. Actually doing some training, probably up at the rifle range that we were talking about earlier. Now, the next view I see misdescribed too often, it's silly, but anyway. In 1931, Gawler hosted the South Australian selections for a thing called the Hudson Trophy. Now, the Hudson Trophy was awarded for the best cavalry brigade, particularly for skills in sabre. Gentleman's there with his sabre. And in 1931, there was 4 teams in South Australia that competed to represent South Australia in the national trophy for the national competition. And in this year, this was won by Lieutenant Wallencheck's troop, who was up from Adelaide. And in 1931, the national competition was held later in Longford in Tasmania, but it was actually won by the Stratford troop in Victoria. And South Australia came 4th, sadly, at that national competition. It's quite a graphic picture, that one, quite a nice one. This one has been reproduced quite a lot. For those who look at eBay, will understand my reluctance to be drawing all my photographs, because if you look on eBay now, you'll find reproductions of these things galore. Which in one way is good, it gets the word out, but on the other hand, it's a bit sad that all these things get reproduced so quickly and easily. Right, no, we had a wonderful talk earlier in the year on horses in Gawler. This is the Gawler handicap on the King's birthday in 1909, and that's horse Ballotta winning the handicap. And those photos I think should be quite common, but they're terribly difficult to find. I was quite pleased to have that. Now, a couple of modern postcards, because I do try and keep up to date. Although, up to date, this one's 20 years old. The 3-day event, that's a special postcard that was done to commemorate that. And the 3 events there, cross-country, show jumping and dressage, should be well known to all of us. And in 1986, they had the World Championships for the 3-day event in here. The next card is to commemorate that one, the World Championships. Also additionally has the stamp and the postmark for the special post office that was set up on the Gawler racecourse for that event. Football teams. This is what Rod's been waiting for. And I would say I've spent a lot of time in the last 2 weeks trying to identify these as best I can. Now, the SSFC turns out to be that Gawler South had a seconds team as well. And these are the Gawler South seconds, and as we can see on their banner, proudly proclaiming they were the premiers in 1905, 1906 and 1907. And research there, I mean, Gawler South seconds is a good record, but Gawler South, I see, is the most premiership wins for any team in South Australia.
The whole Lincoln team, that's
Yes.
equal to now. 36, 37, isn't it?
Yes, it's getting up there. If it's not best, it's the second.
I haven't won one for almost
Yes.
20 odd years.
We had the original photo of that hanging up on our wall. That's my grandpa on the right.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah, if anybody spots anyone that's identifiable, we'll let us know until we can make the notes for future posterity. Now, outside of Gawler, we have the Adelaide Plains League and or Adelaide Plains Association, and this is the first of a pair of cards which I picked up of the Virginia team. And I've made another mistake. This is further research since I prepared all the slides. This is actually 1909. And I now know that from the next slide because I've been studying that inscription at the bottom of there very, very carefully. And it had to be May 1908 or 7 or 09, and it is actually 1909. And it's written up in the register of the day. The caption says, "Interesting spectators and barricades. The first football match, Virginia versus Two Wells, May the 1st, and it's 1909. And in the paper there's a report of the game. The first match of the football club, an opening of the new ground on land given by Mr. Kearse, I think it is, K-E-A-R-S-E. And the club was only formed 3 weeks before the first game. And they had 40 members.
I think Virginia, the Adelaide Plains League started in 1908. And I think Virginia and Two Wells played in 1908, so...
Well, this is 1909, the paper says that was the first game.
First game for the season, perhaps.
No, it said it was the first game on their new ground, so maybe that could be a distinction as well. Yes. And so, as I said, the club formed 3 weeks earlier with 40 members. So, the results of the game, Virginia 14 goals 9, defeated Two Wells, who failed to score.
Fighting hands
I think that's a pretty unusual result in an Australian game.
The photo that you showed first off, I've seen that before there's a newspaper, I think it's called the Labour Herald,
Yes.
and they were very good in 08, 09, posting it, saying Adelaide Plains and stuff.
So the match report went on to say the best on ground were Mr. Maloney, Huxtable, Helps and Captain Neil, N-E-A-L-E. So a few sort of quite recognisable names from that area still about today. Right, the Brossa Association, there's a card there of Tanunda, club there. It's one of those I have. Now the next card I'm presuming is Williston because it's written on the back it's been presented with T. Weaver's compliments in 1909. Weaver's been associated with Williston for as long as anyone can remember. I was quite fascinated with those, and there's quite a few of these. Some of them are nice and neat, like the previous Tanunda one, they're all wearing the same strip, and other ones, they're all mixed up.
Interesting that Tanunda 1908 was also the first year the Boston Lights as well.
And of course, since I live just down the road from the Williston Oval, it's quite precious to me. Next one is Freeling, who also in the Brossa and Light Association, and they were the premiers in 1910, and that's the premiership team.
That's inside of the institute, and they put that up at the back.
Some of these photographs codes for cricket teams quite plentiful, and for football it's the opposite way around. And I don't quite understand that. maybe cricketers are a bit more posh and got more money and can afford a big photo, but the footballers make do with postcard, I'm not sure, but it's a strange observation which I hadn't really made until I started preparing this evening's selection. Right, then we go back to Gawler South. Premiers, will be the first team, Premiers 1909, 10 and 11. Quite proudly there in their hoops. The next card is just marked SFC, which I'm presuming is Smithfield, but I'm really not sure. It's a marching field, and the ball has 1912 on it. If anyone can help with that, we appreciate it again. Then we go a little bit further afield, Riverton, which I'm not sure that's in the Light Association or the Stanley Association. I couldn't really get a clear picture from the newspaper report, but this was 1929. There was a few games of Riverton reported in the newspapers, but not that many. And the final football team is Wasleys, also in the Adelaide Plains Association, and they were the premiers in the centenary year in 1936, and that's the premiership team group there. So you can see my interest in Gawler cards does expand a little bit. I try not to get too distant, but a lot of them, of course, merchants made the photographs of things, you know, all through, not only through Gawler, the Barossa, the Mid-North, right up to Port Pirie, Port Augusta. You will find views developed by merchants. Now, here's a sport which I've just had some recent association with the homing pigeon people. I've just got them to organise a pigeon post for me. So this is S. Henwood's loft, and the card's dated 1910. So it'd be quite early, but he's obviously quite proud of his birds. And you will find results of homing pigeon races in the papers of the day, and Mr. Henwood's name comes up quite frequently. So where precisely Gawler that loft was, I don't know. But there are still a few lofts around Gawler that I hadn't noticed. Cycling. Now we do have a view of the Gawler Cycling Club in about 1910, but I haven't been able to lay my hands on that, filed it. But this is quite a nice marching view of a lady proudly with a good-looking bike, and which I'm sure would be worth a few bob if it was in that nip today. Now the next one, for those, you know, people who play on eBay, I'm now will never cease to be amazed where things turn up. And this came from a collection of trotting ephemera that had been formed in the United States. And it came up, and I was looking, you know, he had badges from trotting clubs worldwide, and I bought quite a few of the Gawler Trotting Club badges. And he had two views of this horse, and this is Killarney's Kiss. Now, this is dated on the back 13th of May 1941, so I had a look at the bunyip to find out what was going on then. And he was the winner of the Union Handicap, won by 10 yards, won a £24 prize, and it paid 8 shillings for the win on the tote. So what fascinated me was, I know horse racing was suspended in World War II, but obviously the harness racing kept going. And it's interesting that this horse competed all around South Australia, and many of the races were actually at Wayville, going around the trotting track, whilst the army camp was next door, so maybe it provided a lot of entertainment for the troops and the training.
They had a trotting track around Gawler over there for a while too.
Well, that's it. That is Gawler over. Yes.
Recognise the tree.
Now we have a couple of slides of more recent past time. Pity Rob Richter's not here tonight. One of the sailplanes over Gawler. This is about 1960. This actually comes from a press photograph, as does the next view, which is described as a Schneider glider at a gliding school in October 1959. So it says it's over somewhere in the hills just behind us here. And once again, a more modern card for the Bathurst Challenge in 1997, a car owned by James Rosenberg at Gawler Farm Machinery and driven by Mark Paul. But I never actually found out how they got on.
Didn't finish.
Didn't finish? Right. Charity events is another one. Of course, there were a lot of those in the World War I things last year. This is a new addition. This is an Australia Day float for the Queen of the 27th Battalion. And I've dated this one to July 1915, which then was Australia Day. And that was a fundraising day for the Wounded Soldiers Fund. And they would have had parades and floats like this in every country town all across the state. Now the next one is also a picture which is quite often seen, and these were the French soldiers who were en route to New Caledonia, led by General Howe, and they visited lots of towns around Australia, thanking the citizens for raising funds for the French Red Cross and other charities that assisted France in the First War. And as we see, that was in July 1918. Quite a nice photo, that one. Now, here's another mystery solved as a result of researching tonight. This is a first of a group of 3 cards that I bought with all these lovely ladies dressed up in Japanese costume. The last of the 3 I'll come to was dated, so that gave me a lead. And in May 1914 there was a Japanese fair in a Japanese village set up in the exhibition building at the Gawler Showgrounds. And this was to raise funds to buy equipment for the Hudson Hospital, which was then just being built. And so why they chose a Japanese theme, I have no idea. So this group of ladies here, who are probably all on the organising committee. We have the next view is a similar view, probably the same ladies on the same day. Now the Japanese village was set up in the exhibition hall, and it was an active working village on the 20th of May for a day, and then for the next 3 days it was just there as an exhibition for people to pay an admission fee and go and look at. And the final view is identified on the back. This is Kathleen Hutchinson. I don't know how many views there are of the Hutchinson family.
What the house is?
I don't know what the house is, no. And that was the clue to it all. And the newspaper reports say that the event raised £220 to buy equipment for the hospital.
So was she the wife of
It actually been the daughter, I think.
The daughter of Hudson?
Certainly all there's a long list of misses given who were on the organising committee for this fair. And a lot of sort of well-known Gawler names amongst that group. So there may be some Gawler families well represented in that group of ladies. The next view is once again, if anybody been in the Gawler Institute in the library building would have seen similar views to these. This was the procession for the Golden Jubilee at the Gawler Institute in 1907. And I would say there's a lot of postcards of these views around, photographs of them. This one and the next one are both photographs of the passing parade going in front of the Institute in Town Hall. There was a lot of lodges in Gawler. The next slide shows the lodge at Williamstown. And I'm not sure which branch of masonry or Freemasonry is the one at Williamstown. But I love their banner, go thou and do likewise. Might be something we should be spreading the word on Saturday to all the public visiting the stand for the history team. The next one's something I've not been able to identify. Another street parade in Gawler. I would suggest it's about World War I, but I'm not sure. Simply don't know. They sort of look like Boy Scouts there.
Tram lines are still there.
Tram lines mean it's
1932.
1879 and 1931.
And that in this week's Bunyip, Stan mentioned about that balcony above where White's chemist now is. Is that the one, Stan?
Yeah. That's
Terry White's chemist.
White's chemist. That would be the shop, yes.
it's easy to sort of think of it as the Gawler Arms, but you look at the shop.
No, it's not.
Gawler Arms is up this way more.
The large building in the background is the
National Bank, yeah.
But there's not much of a discernible gap there at Todd Street, but it is there.
Yes.
Right, now, next view.
Same again.
It's taken at the same size. It's probably taken with the balcony of the town hall.
No, no.
I'd say it's Prince Albert.
Balcony of the Prince Albert.
Taken from the balcony.
Yes,
Going up on the town hall balcony and looking down.
but this one I have identified. This is the Victory Procession that was in 1919, which was delayed till March because of the travel restrictions due to the Spanish flu that was just abating at that time. Now the next picture is, once again, I've had a good strong magnifying glass looking at all of this. All of these horses are decorated. They all have flags on their blankets. There's some decorated vehicles in the background there, and so I'm thinking this is an assembly point for a parade. Everybody's gathering before the parade. And since all the processions in Murray Street all seem to go from south to north, I'm thinking, well, this is probably around Dead Man's Pass area. Now, I think tonight's topic was events, and I suppose all of us have one of these. A family event, this is a wedding. This is a merchant's photographic card, and it's written on the back. It was written on the back, Parker Smith wedding, and it had a date, so I was able to look that up. And as I was mentioning, the difficulty with merchants' photographs is you cannot assume that they're all Gawler, and this is actually a Port Pirie couple, Roland Parker and Edna Smith, who were married at Prospect. But it does quite likely have a Gawler connection because the best man was a Les Modra, very common name around here, and the bride's cousin, which is one of the two ladies, I don't know which, was a Miss E. Modra. So that's probably the Gawler connection. Now the next group of photographs are probably the most depicted natural event in Gawler, seen on picture postcards, and this is the 1917 flood. I don't know if people wanted a distraction from the war or if they just, it was such a photogenic opportunity, I don't know.
Million Bridge.
Now the 1917 flood was the biggest flood since 1889, and it may still be probably rated one of the largest floods of the rivers ever at the time. The South Para was a record, the North Para didn't quite meet the record of 1889, but it got pretty close. And as you can see here, this is the tram bridge, and well, you can see the girders are below the tram bridge now, and water is just beneath that. So it's got pretty high. The supports that hold the girders of the tram bridge up, they were all submerged by the water at the time. And the next view, appropriately, is of Water Street. And that's exactly what it is. Can't quite remember which of the nth streets this is in Gawler South. But in that street there, most of the homes were flooded, and a couple of the worst ones. The worst one got to within 3 inches of the ceiling.
Probably 8th Street. 8th Street, going down to Goose Island.
And a poor chap who copped it then also had lived in the same house and was flooded out in 1889 and a few other times in between. And at that point he announced to the bunyip he was giving up and moving. Right, the next view is probably a backwards view from the other one. This is Goose Island looking towards Whitehall Terrace. And the buildings in the top right corner there, you'll see they're the ones of the end of Walker Place. Give you an idea of where we're looking. And the next one is of Whitehall Terrace, and the building in the background of that are the same buildings as we saw in the other view, looking towards the north.
A variation of that picture I put on the website this week.
Okay. Now, I've probably seen half a dozen fairly large floods in Gawler. I've never seen it lap into Whitehall Terrace. but I've never seen it breach that bank on that side. So it's pretty high. Now, the next one's Gawler West. Pretty good expansive water there. And the next one is also Gawler West. And you quite clearly see the Marchant Studios imprint in the lower part of that photograph. And the fact that these were being done was actually mentioned in the Bunyip's report of the floods. So they wrote, Mr. E. Marchant, and that would have been Eb Marchant, spent a busy time taking photographs of the flooded parts, and postcards and views are obtainable at his studio in Murray Street. So it's probably one of the reasons why there are so many views of the Gawler flood about, because he was busy making money. The next one is not a Marchant's card. But this was actually made by getting two photographs and photographing it and making that into a postcard. So the next slide is a close-up view of the top photo of that, and that, I believe, is looking back at Goose Island, and if you look real closely in the background, there's a couple of rooftops. So, give you an idea how high that got. And the next picture is the lower of the two, and once again, clearly, the rooftops in the background. Okay. The next slide is the Gawler West Footbridge. The reports of the day said the footbridges survived remarkably well, considering what was being washed down, not just the weight of water, but all the debris that was being pushed down with them. So there wasn't much damage to be repaired. And the next view, I think, is Ducks Flat, Gawler West. So it's looking back towards the town from the west to the east. And then we go to the North Parra. That's the bridge that was at the north end of Murray Street, and the house at the top of the hill would be where the eyes live now, top there. It's identifiable. The next slide shows the Williston Bridge. Now in 1889 the flood washed away the original North Road Bridge and it had to be rebuilt. And in 1917, when this was, well, it got to within 4 feet of the underside bridge. Pretty high.
Pity about the caravan park.
Yes, the caravan park.
Look.
Yes, I've seen caravans floating down the river. The next one is another in that series of cards made up of 2 photos. And this is sort of where, this is now Gawler River proper. So the next slide shows the lower of the 2 views. And the next one is the upper of the 2 views, and that's the railway bridge at Gawler River. Now, next one now is the earliest photograph of an event in Gawler which I have, which is a photograph which a lot of people would have seen. But it's nice to actually own originals of these things, which I do. So that's April 1890 with the first loco coming out of the Martin's workshops. Also a nice regal event as well. Now the King Street cutting. So I have 2 views of that. So this one's looking west, and the house on the corner, which of course is still there. The message on the back of this card says that this is Miss Grow's house. Now the next view will have some significance to Tony, if he's still earlier Tony was here. Because the message on the back of this card, which shows the station house, which we all know, but the message on the back of this card says it's Arthur Smith's house. Of course, was well known in the dentistry area that we heard about last year.
That used to be called Stubb Street.
Stubb Street was, so basically where the railway line took
Is
over.
now.
Yes.
Stubb Street.
So that was about November 1909, that cutting begins. Now also associated with the construction of the line to Angaston is the next view, and this was the crash of a ballast train. This is at the Wheatsheaf bend, and essentially what happened there is that the train broke away from the loco and it basically became a runaway, and of course when it got to the bend they all overturned, and it caused that mess. So it was well written up at the time. That's the only scene of that crash I've ever seen, so it's quite pleasing to have that. Still on a railway theme, the old race day specials that used to come to the
Wow.
race course. That's 1950, and that's a big train.
That is a big train.
Carrying a lot of people.
Is that like a Prince of Gloucester or something like that train? Or?
No, this is the day of the races.
No, the train name.
Oh, the loco. I'm not sure what it is. I've got the loco number I've got, so I could look it up. And for those who do collect all the things, you can actually get the special 3-part tickets. So, train ticket, the admission to the ground, and the return train ticket. It's come in 3 parts. The most modern postcards in the tonight's selection are the next 2 for the 150th anniversary of the railway, 2007. So this multi-scene card was done by Railmax, and this was the guy, the train buff who lives up at Roseworthy. He's done a whole series of cards, all railway related. But the 4 views of the station in 2007. The Bluebird is the wine train in 1991. The tank engine is one of the Railway Historical Society's engines, and visiting in 1995 when they used to make pretty frequent trips before they all got isolated at Mount Barker. And the lower right view is another race day special, but probably also a Railway Historical Society train. 2 RX locos hauling the race special in 1972.
We have been promised that canopy is going to be reinstated.
I heard it's all in storage, 100 parts.
Yes.
Century, right?
Not sure in whose lifetime, but
Okay. Yeah. Now, picnic events are something that we've probably all have experienced at one time or another. Now, this picnic is at Williamstown, but have no further details apart from the fact that it's at Williamstown. The next one. I love the fact they've all got teacups with sauces. A very posh picnic. Now, the next scene is the Henley on Parrot, as it was described in the newspaper. And this was the opening of the swimming lake in the Parra River, or the South Parra. They built a weir in there, and this was mooted to be one of Gawler's World War I memorials. There's a special park along there with a playground, swimming lake and the like. So they did actually build a weir, and they did have a swimming lake there for a while. And this is the opening of that weir and lake, November 1919, where they had the Minister of Education came to do the opening ceremony, and they had something called a natatorial display by Miss Kate Farrelly, the champion swimmer from Glenelg. You know, I had to look up what natatorial means, and it means swimming. So.
that'll be opposite Conversations Cafe, roughly.
About that, yes. That would be the spot. Because you've still got the 2 levels of paths,
Yeah.
still there today. Now, the next card is a Lancastrian aircraft at Gawler. This is another instance of somebody's found a nice photo on the web and made it into a postcard, 60 years after the event. The Lancastrians resumed airmail service from England to Australia in 1945, and Gawler was one of the refuelling stops. It didn't last that long before it got replaced by the Qantas services. And the final event, of course, is Gawler's 150th anniversary in 1989, and this is a picture postcard that used to be on sale at the Visitor Centre, showing the cake, which is still on display at the Visitor Centre. And interestingly, the card's got an error on the back because the card says it was in 1998 rather than 1989, so they got the other one back front. So I don't know if they'll ever issue one with a correction or not, but that was there. So that was my selection of events for this year. It proved to be a bit of a tough selection, trying to find nearly 100 different views that you haven't seen before. I think I've only repeated about 5 things that you haven't seen before. So wasn't too bad an effort. But what does surprise me with photographs of events, that some of them as picture postcards are very plentiful, but when you look at what else was going on at the time, the events that were in Gawler at the time, and obviously a lot of them that would have been great photographic subjects, there is just nothing existing for them. I don't quite understand that. So things like the visits of the aviators in 1914, there was an aircraft in Gawler in 1917, the balloon ascents in 1908, 9, 10, would have been terrific photographs, just can't find them. I don't know why they weren't done. That's about it. So, I hope you've enjoyed tonight.
One question, why don't the locomotives come down to Gawler anymore? Do you know?
Because they made the Adelaide Melbourne line 4 foot 8.5 standard gauge, and all the locos are 5'3", and so the Rail Historical Society shifted the whole operations from Dry Creek to Barker because they make more money out of running the cotton train and the trains from down Barker down to Victor Harbour than what they were doing on these local trains.
Robert.
Well, on behalf of everyone, thank you. That was very interesting talk on Postcards, Martin. It was your third time. We've still got 2 more. Do you think we'll have some more to have a 6th one in a couple of years?
By then I might have bought a few more, yes.
Yes, and I'm very pleased that you put some sports in there. Thank you very much.
Especially.